Welcome back, superstar, to What is the Myers-Briggs Personality Test Part 2. We're going to dig into the types. Let's go. All right, in this video, I'm going to dive into the 4 functions, and I'm going to tell you the meaning of each of the letters. I'm going to share with you a little bit about how the letters work together and the different types. And then I'm going to share with you a story, my story, about what happened when I got certified and I was mistyped initially, and what it felt like to be in the wrong type category, and then what it felt like to find my right type category, so that you can help identify if and when you go through this process, which is your Myers-Briggs type. And then in video 3, I'm going to dive even deeper into the types and something called type dynamics, about how the different letters impact and influence each other. Okay, here we go. So my purpose in this video is to help you understand and interpret your results more effectively, and also to identify if perhaps you've been mistyped, and also to get to know yourself a little bit deeper. There's certain things that I've discovered over the years that people seem to find really valuable about the way that I look at Myers-Briggs in particular. So first things first, what you got to understand is that Myers-Briggs is based on a concept, an underlying theory of preferences. Preferences, it's important that you get this word, because people think sometimes that because it's a test, or they think it's a test, we don't actually call it a test, that there's like a good or bad or right or wrong, and none of that is true. In fact, this is only about preferences. So I want you to do a little exercise with me right now. We're going to do this together. I want you to take out a pen, and on a piece of paper, go ahead, pause me if you need to, and just write your name on a piece of paper, just like I did. Great? Yep. Probably really, really easy. You do it all the time. Now I want you to do something for me, and take that pen, put it in the other hand, and write your name. Wow, this is pretty good. I'm kind of impressed with myself. With your other hand. All right, now I'm going to guess that that took a little longer. It was definitely, not as neat and pretty, right? Didn't feel as comfortable. My right hand, for me it's my right hand, my dominant hand, was a lot easier, right? Now, just because I prefer to write with my dominant hand, it doesn't mean that I can't use my left hand. It doesn't mean that I would want you to come and cut off my left hand, right? Like, I still use and need both. There's still value in both. And this is the fundamental underlying concept I want you to understand with Myers-Briggs. Just because you have a preference and a way of being that's more natural does not mean that you're not able to move into other ways of being, that you cannot operate at other levels. But what we're looking for in Myers-Briggs is simply what is natural, what is easy, what comes to you that you don't have to try so hard. And the idea being that when we orient our lives around what is natural and easy and in flow, things are easier. Life is easier. Work is easier. Things are more fun. We don't have to think as hard. We don't have to try as hard, right? And that doesn't mean that we don't want to develop aspects of ourselves. We can absolutely do that, just knowing that what comes naturally is always going to be what's easiest, all right? So now let's talk about what the letters mean. So we're going to start with, there's the E and the I scale. The E is extroversion, the I is introversion. Now, you might notice that in the world of Webster's dictionary, they spell extroversion with an O, extroversion. In the world of Myers-Briggs, it's spelled with an A for some reason, all right? So extroversion, introversion. I'm not going to dive too super deeply into each of these. We could probably spend hours on each of these scales. So I'm going to give you the nuts and bolts here. What we're looking for here is what we call orientation, all right? Simply that, are we oriented towards the external world, extroversion, or are we oriented toward the internal world? Another way to look at this is where do we derive our energy, right? Do we find ourselves getting very energized in groups of people around others? That's me. I tend to be very extroverted. Or do we tend to drive our energy from our internal world, that we need to go inward and be kind of by ourselves or with a few people to generate energy in order to go out into the world, right? So it's really about which direction we're oriented in. The second scale is the N S. The N stands for intuition. So the N is for the N in intuition, and the S stands for sensing. Okay? And just to clarify here, this is extroversion, and this is introversion. The NS is all about your perceiving. How do you perceive? How do you gather information about the world? So if this is the how are you oriented to the world, this is how do you gather information about the world? Do you gather it through this intuition, which is very associated to big picture ideas, recognizing patterns, ideation, right? Or do you gather information about the world from concrete senses, from your five senses, from what you see, what you hear, what you touch, etc., right? So someone who gathers information about the world, who prefers to gather, remember this is all about preferences, who prefers to gather information about the world from the five senses is going to have, a different way of looking at the world, different way of engaging with the world than someone who's operating more from ideas and pattern recognition and the association of things. Now, a great way to define or to see the difference of this is to do this fun exercise where you take an object, any object, like here, this cup, and you put it in front of somebody and you say, describe this object. The person who views the world like an S, the S type of person, is going to say, oh, it's white and it's made of plastic or something plasticky. It's, got a word on the top. It's got coffee inside. It holds coffee, right? They're going to tell you about the physical characteristics of it, right? And they're going to, oh, there's this beautiful, flower thing on the front. The N type is going to say, oh, this looks like something my grandmother had in her cabinet, and it reminds me of something, or, oh, I think I could use it for coffee, I could use it for water, I could use it to keep things hot, to keep things cold. I wonder if it's microwavable, right? Like the N person is going to look at all the associations of the object, while the S person is going to stay more focused on the sensory aspects of the object, all right? And this, by the way, from what I've seen in settings where I deliver the test, this is usually the thing that impacts the most how people communicate with each other. By the way, before I get on to the third and fourth sets of letters, I want to invite you to take a moment. Please subscribe to my channel, like this video, maybe throw me a comment below. What's your Myers-Briggs type? I'm going to tell you mine in a little bit. So the next one is TF. Now this is the one I had the most trouble with. This is the one that I kind of went back and forth with, which I'll tell you a little more about in my story. The T is thinking, and the F is feeling. Now, this function, we call it a function, is about how we make decisions, how we judge or decide things, right? It's about how we come to a conclusion about something. So this is how we gather information about it. This is how we make a decision about it. Do we make the decision based on logic, rationale, reason, black and white, cut and dry type of things? Or do we make decisions based on emotion, based on a value judgment about the greater good or about what's better for other people or better for ourselves? Like, are we making a judgment based on, this is what feels true, this is what aligns with my values, this is what is, correct or right? Or are we making the judgment based on here's the rules, here are the guidelines, this is how we're supposed to do it. I make decisions based on these parameters, right? Something more logical, logic-based versus feeling-based. And then finally, the PJ is perceiving, judging. Now, you may recognize the words perceiving and judging, and you would be accurate to do so because basically all this parameter, all this function does is tell us whether we tend to prefer this function or this function. This was not part of Carl Jung's original philosophy on personality. This is something that was added later by Myers-Briggs. And so what it just says is, all right, I am someone who prefers the information gathering function, or I'm someone who prefers the deciding function. That's it. So you've got to let go of any baggage you might have about the words perceiving. It doesn't mean perceptive, or about the words judging. It doesn't mean judgmental. All it means is, do we prefer this function or this function? All right. So this is basically which function we prefer. So now that you have an overview of the four letters, you can start to think about. You don't even need to take the inventory. think about which is your type. I want to tell you a little bit about my story. So I always have typed, in my past, have always typed as an ENTP. ENTP, extroversion, intuition, thinking, and perceiving. When I went to my certification program and I showed up, that was the paperwork that was given to me. ENTP, no surprise there. What was a little interesting was that this dichotomy here was very, very close to the middle, which simply means that the preference was there, but it was very slight towards the T. So this program was about 5 days long, and I think around the second day, the professor, the leader of the program, the guy who wrote the books, his name's Charles Martin. He's, the foremost expert on Myers-Briggs, or one of, and he called me over to his table. And he had been watching me over the course of the 2 or 3 days that we were in the program, where I was sitting, because he had put us in these groups with our types. So I was sitting with a group of ENTPs. Now let me tell you a little bit about ENTPs, right? They like to debate stuff, right? They're extroverted, so they're gain their energy, they're oriented outward, they're big idea people, they've got lots of ideas, everything relates to everything else. They love to make decisions based on logic and rationale, and they love to keep talking about things and keep gathering information on and on and on. They don't like to close down a debate, they like to keep it open. So here I am with this group of ENTPs, and I'm getting a little bit exhausted, quite honestly, because they're just arguing about everything. Let's just call a spade a spade. Felt like argument. To them, it's fun. But to me, it felt really heavy and like argument. And so the professor called me over. He said, I've been observing you over the last few days, and I think you're in the wrong group. Would you be open to switching groups? And I was like, sure, because I was feeling exhausted. And he said, I'd like to, and I said to him, what do you think? You think I'm an introvert? And he laughed at me. He's like, no, you're not. I don't think you're an introvert. I think you're an F type, ENFP. And I was like, F? No. I was a math major. I have a master's degree in business. Like, no way I'm an F. I'm all T all the way. I know my test was, kind of in the middle there, but I'm clear that I'm this. He's like, well, would you be open to giving it a shot? I was like, you know what? I'm kind of exhausted of these people, so okay, sure. The next session that we're going to have, he stands up in the front of the room and he says, hey, everybody, I've got an announcement. We've got a person who's going to switch groups. And he called me up. Michelle is going to move from the ENTP group to the ENFP group. And the ENFP group got up and cheered when I started walking over to their table. And I was like, oh, I'm home. These are my people. And I've never looked back. And it's just such a perfect fit. I felt like I was in the right place for the first time. I was surrounded by other people who love to play and talk and love to ideate and love to have fun while they were doing it. They loved to, kid around and perform. It was just, a bunch of class clowns getting together. And that felt much more aligned to me than the other group. Not that there's anything wrong with the other group. It just wasn't aligned with my preferences and my nature. That's how much of a difference one letter can make. And now in the next video, I'm going to dive into why that is, how one letter influences the whole setup. And there's something called type dynamics, which is how the letters work together and how they develop over the course of your life. So meet me over on video 3. I'll see you there.